Yeah, the Chaos Bed Vestiges are better. Okay, so we'll do the review now. You know, I've been a Souls fan since Demon Souls. That was the first Souls game I played. And when I first played that game, I didn't even know what it was. I heard it was an RPG that was made by a Japanese developer, so I thought it was a Japanese RPG. So when I first played it, I didn't like it because it wasn't what I expected it to be. But then after I gave it a shot, gave it an honest shot, I've been in love with the series ever since. And From Software has never made a bad game that I played. Every single From Software game I played, I loved it. I was about to say they've never made a bad Souls game, but they never actually made a bad game that I've ever played. Every single game is amazing. And, you know, Dark Souls 3 is the best Dark Souls game yet. And ever will be, since they're not going to be making any more. Probably. It's not as good as Bloodborne, but it is better than all the previous Dark Souls games, and it is better than Demon Souls. It is the best. So, like, which makes sense. You know, you would expect it to be the best. But in the ways that it is the best, it's just like kind of like the minor improvements rather than anything major. Like, graphics-wise, it looks great. The artwork is fantastic, which is what we expect from Software. But really, technically speaking, it's only a little bit better than Dark Souls 2. These kinds of games, they really are like PS3 games that have been upscaled to 1080p, running at 60 frames per second. So they don't look like what we would expect a PS4 game to look now. It's not using a next-gen engine. But it's the artwork that really makes up for that fact. You know, the creativity of the monsters and the bosses, the design that went into it, the intricate detail and everything. Just in this room alone, everything just looks so gorgeous. You know, like, you can't believe how good it looks, despite the fact that it doesn't look, you know, it doesn't look like a quote-unquote next-gen game. But despite that, it's the artwork is so over the top, and that's something that holds true irrespective of how advanced engines become. But like I said, it isn't like significantly better looking than Dark Souls 1 or 2. But it still looks fantastic. Music-wise, it sounds great, you know, everything that we expect. And gameplay-wise, you know, they actually, they did improve upon the gameplay a little bit, and just a little bit when it comes to untargeted, unlocked gameplay. You actually lock on a little bit. Whoops, wrong thing. He'll auto-target when he's not locked on, which is a nice improvement that they made in this game that I really appreciate. Another thing I really appreciate are these L2 attacks that they added. They really enhanced the combat abilities, and made the game a much deeper combat system than any of the previous games. And that adds such a huge layer of depth by adding these L2 attacks to every weapon in the game. So yeah, those are the reasons why it is better, why it's the best in the series, because the little things, you know, it doesn't make they don't make huge improvements. It's the small improvements while maintaining all of the other great things about Dark Souls. It maintains all of that. The level design is still as fantastic as it ever was. you know, when I first played Dark Souls 1, it gave me like what I call a holy shit moments, is what I call them. Moments that made me stand in awe of how amazing it looked. The locales that it created, the environments that it had. You know, that's what really made me realize that Dark Souls was really something special. And Dark Souls 3 absolutely had those moments as well. Like this area, for example, you know, beautiful blue skies, this dragon keep in the middle of nowhere, you know, the castle at the end, which is dark and foreboding, but looks beautiful at the same time. You know, so many holy shit moments that like I couldn't believe. Not as many as Dark Souls 1, because that was, you know, it was still new. But definitely had it in this game as well. I think the difficulty, like I mentioned before, that this might be the easiest Dark Souls game, but you know, after like, it's really hard to say what is the hardest or what is the easiest, because really none of them are, because they're all harder and easier than others in different ways. This game is easier in the sense that when you die, you don't lose your max health like you do in Demon Souls or Dark Souls 2. And when you defeat a boss, you become embered and you get even more health. So those little things make it easier. And generally speaking, you know, like the bosses were not too bad, but you know, to make up for it, then you have bosses that are absolutely insane, like just crazy hard. In particular, the multi-phased fights. Now, I need to talk about that, because that is one of the things that I wasn't too crazy about in Dark Souls 3. Now, you get these boss fights which are multi-phase. You'll beat it, and then you have to fight another boss with full health. And this is the first game to do that. And I didn't mind it once. But when they did it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and then there was one where it was literally 3 phases, that was insane. Yeah, I thought that was a bit excessive. Like, I thought that they drew that out a little bit too much. You know, in Dark Souls 2, the big thing about Dark Souls 2 was the gank fights. The big thing in Dark Souls 3 are the multi-phased fights. So I didn't really like it after, you know, them doing it over and over again. Now, in terms of the weapon balance, I'm probably going to be wrong about this. I hope I'm not, but I'm pretty sure they nerfed some weapons. Some weapons are a little bit too weak. Like the Moonlight Greatsword. Like, it has this cool L2 attack, but the range of it's just too short. And I really wish it was longer like it is in Bloodborne. You know, for such a big weapon, and I wish it was a little stronger. Other weapons are also a little bit too weak. Magic, I don't know what they did with magic. I don't know if I did the build wrong, but I don't think I did, because my intelligence is very high. But I think magic got gimped a little bit too much. It is very weak and useless, as far as I can tell in this game. I'm sure someone will correct me and say, oh no, you gotta do the build like this. Okay, but having an intelligence of 43 and a +9 staff, it was just too weak. It was crap. Very rarely was there any use for using spells. I think it's because maybe magic was very powerful in previous Dark Souls games, so they tried to rebalance it here, and they kind of went too far in that direction. Speaking of ranged attacks, though, you know, in previous Souls games, ranged attacks were really overpowered. Like in Demon Souls, if you go for a sorcerer, you are way overpowered by the mid to late game, because enemies do not know how to deal with an enemy that has a ranged attack. That is not the case in this game at all. Enemies will punish ranged attackers even more heavily than melee attackers. So playing as a ranged attacker like me, a pyromancer, is not easy mode by any stretch of the imagination. And that's a good thing. This game is harder to cheese. You know, how I was talking about how, you know, there's other things that make this game harder. This game is harder to cheese than any other Souls game, as far as I can tell. And that's a good thing. They designed the bosses so well, and they took into account every little thing, so that even if you're using ranged attacks, the bosses know how to handle it. I like how they kept in a lot of the best features of Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 got a lot of flack, but they kept in all the stuff that people liked, and they left out all the stuff that didn't really work. You know, they brought I like how they made the jump button the L3 button, but you can also use the circle button in the options menu, so they kept that. So I really like that. But they removed the healing gems, because apparently you can break the game in Dark Souls 2 that way. And they added in the blue Estus, which is a welcome addition to this game. It's very cool. Now you have to balance between the two types of Estises, and that's really cool and awesome. Adds another layer of depth and item management to the game. The other complaint I would have is that there's a lot of useless spells. I wish more of the spells were useful. I know it's hard to balance them all, and inevitably some spells are just going to overpower and be more useful. But I just felt like there was kind of like too many pyromancy spells that just were useless, and definitely too many mage sorcery spells that didn't do anything. So really, those are my only major, I wouldn't call them major gripes, just gripes. And they don't in any way affect my enjoyment of the game. They're just things to point out, because the game is fantastic no matter what. Unbelievably fantastic. It's the best in the Dark Souls series, including Demon Souls. But with that said, you know, I hope there isn't a Dark Souls 4, because I'm ready for something brand new. I think, you know, this is about as good as it gets, and the medieval style and theme is kind of wearing a little thin, so I'm ready for something brand new. But this is a great game to send it off, and I'm really glad I finally got a chance to play it and beat it all. And that's all I gotta say.